Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. I haven't got any light fittings to punch now, so I just have to talk and hope you listen. So, yeah, thank you all for coming. There's loads of new faces and familiar faces in the audience, so thank you to those of you who've come for the first time for being here for the first time, and thank you for those of you who are returning. It's awesome to see you. So, for those of you who don't know, we're the Game Dev Group. I'm Nathaniel, I'm the founder, and we're a community of passionate game developers who come together once a month to meet, learn, and collaborate, and just be awesome and friendly and welcoming while we do it. So always just say, if you see new people, if you see people sort of milling around, not really knowing anyone if they're here for the first time, go up and say hello. Everyone's super friendly. And yeah, that's the whole sort of principle of the community, to be as welcoming as possible. So always like to start these events by saying a massive thank you. Thank you to you guys for all being here. Thank you to our amazing speakers, past, present, and future. So thank you to those of you who are in the audience right now who are going to speak in the future. Come and have a chat. Thank you as well to the three people who help every month. So you'll see these guys dotted around in Game Dev Group shirts. You've got Luke, who's somewhere. You've got Anthony at the back doing the AV stuff. Luke's there, and Dee Dee, you'll see her bombing around taking awesome photos. So yeah, again, if you're looking for someone to talk to, these guys are really welcoming and help out every month, so thank you to them. Thank you as well to our incredible partner, Mill Street. So Mill Street is obviously the incredible space that we're in. They're very generously let us use the space, and so Beth is around somewhere. If you speak to her, you're interested in co-working spaces, meeting rooms, just coming and having a drink after work and maybe having a work conversation at the bar. It's always good. Speak to Beth. So we have some awesome announcements to make, something I'm super excited about. First of all is we've won some funding to do 16-week funded boot camps for aspirants and graduates coming into the games industry. So that is something that we are doing in collaboration with a company called Creative Alliance. They are Birmingham-based and a independent training provider specializing in digital creative media, but they're a social enterprise and they help people into the creative industries. And they have come to us and asked for help delivering industry-led games boot camps. So got a bit of funding from the DoD to put those on free to the end user. So they're going to be aimed at graduates, aspirants who have a foundational knowledge of their discipline, so we're not going to be teaching people from the ground up. The idea being that it's industry-led, they get to meet industry mentors and build a small game within 16 weeks and basically become industry ready. So it's trying to sort of help them go from graduate to polished and ready to go as soon as they get into their first role. So we are looking for people in industry already to help us out with this. So if you're interested in running a 90-minute seminar or guiding and mentoring the teams, or most importantly, if you're a studio or work at a studio, you might be interested in giving post-bootcamp interviews, because obviously that's the ultimate aspiration, is to help get people into work, into their dream role in the industry. So that's that. Please come and have a chat afterwards if you're interested. Sorry about the visual pun here. I couldn't think of any other way to represent game jams. But I've been saying that we're going to do these for the last year and a half. Basically, since we started, people have been asking to do them. And I've been saying, yeah, 2 months from now we're going to do it. And we just haven't found a space, haven't been able to do it. We've finally got a space. We're finally going to do it. So we've got a date, early April, hopefully the first weekend of April. We run our first game jam. And these will be running quarterly now. So really looking forward to those. Also, backed by popular demand, we've got Bring Your Own Games Nights. So these, we were running them monthly last year, and just a really cool opportunity just to get in and play games with people in the community. It's like, if you've got a game that you like, video game, board game, bring it along. Or actually no game, if you want to just come and hope that someone else has bought a game, play with them. It's just a great way to meet people in the community. One thing that we're really keen to do this time is basically have people who are working on games, bring them on, and get feedback. So if you're, an indie dev, indie studio, if you're just a group of friends working on a game and you want feedback, come along, show it off, and yeah, just play it with the community. We've had people do that a few times in the past, and it's just been absolute amazing fun and really, really valuable for them. So yeah, we'll be scaling those up this year as well. Again, running them quarterly, so the first one will be Friday the 1st of March, and we'll get out and meet up and yeah, come along and have a great time. Also, weirdly enough, which one is it? I'll stand in the middle. Yeah, we've got a mixology workshop, which is really odd, but basically we go down and have drinks at the terrace every now and again, and the guy approached me and was like, hey, do you want to do a mixology workshop? And I was like, not really, like, we're a game dev community, so I don't know if it makes sense. And I thought about it, and I was like, we're a game dev community, we like drinking, so yeah, why not? So yeah, I put it out to the community, and loads of people were like keen for it. So we will be putting those on. I'm going to have a chat to the guy tonight, and at some point in the next couple of months, we'll be running a mixology workshop, or we won't be running it, they will. We'll just be drinking. So last thing for me is basically, if you have a good time tonight, which I'm sure you will because we've got two incredible speakers, please just share it far and wide. Obviously trying to build this into the biggest, best community of game developers that it can be. So hashtag the GDG on social media. You might get an email from Meetup saying, did you have a good time? Give us a star rating. Or on Google if you want to give us a star rating, that also helps. But yeah, just trying to get the word out and just build it to the best community that it can be. That is it from me, because you're not here to listen to me talk. So we've got our two incredible speakers tonight. David Pumpa from Playground Games, who's the lead cinematic animator, and Angelo Tsiflas, senior lighting artist at Sumo Digital. So we've got Angelo up first. We'll give him a big welcoming round of applause, please.
Gonna have the clicker. Oh, sorry. Yep. All right. So before we get started, can I get some hands up? How many artists we got here? All right. Yeah, more than the average. How many programmers we got here? Oh no, you're too many guys. No, go away. All right, I was just stalling for time. There's yeah. All right, we're going to talk about lighting art, a few things about me. I mean, kind of, you know, the thought of the talk was to be like how you get into lighting, and I didn't start off with lighting, so, oh no, that's the wrong font. Yeah. Oh yeah, also don't expect a serious talk here. So, started off 5 years ago as a 3D artist. Initially, like, also did a couple of things. Wasn't really sure if I was gonna do 3D art. Started off as a programmer. I'm a computer science dropout, so my friend is gonna love me saying that like I have a technical background. So yeah, I went into a 3D animation college in Greece. Went into ArcViz. That was Fatoni Studio. Then after 6-7 months, I moved into games officially at Terrahard, an outsourced studio doing AR, VR stuff. And we had some internal projects, like some console games, some mobile games, everything in between, really. So I was doing characters, I was doing props, environments, whatnot. And yeah, this is about when I decided to move into games. And yeah, focus on environments. Afterwards, like a year later, just moved into Out of the Blue Games, did some environment and lighting art, and this is when I moved more into lighting art, basically. A year goes by, I move into the UK here at Codemasters, doing lighting art for F1 2022, 23. And yeah, here we are now, doing still lighting. And yeah, I'm at Sumo Digital right now. It's an unannounced project, so it's a cool one. So yeah, make sure to keep an eye out. So what is lighting art, and why do you even need that? So basically, yeah, you need to, as you can tell, make sure that all the other artists' work is shown under the best light. Oh yes. But why bother, right? Environment artists can do lighting art. All of the character artists, for example, when they want to present their work, have to present the work with lights. But sometimes, like especially with bigger projects, you kind of have to have someone specialized. And yeah, if you're an environment artist, for example, it's a great opportunity to like get a more specific role and like doing those kind of things instead of just doing assets, for example. As you could tell, for example, yeah, good lighting can make a mediocre scene a proper character, or it can also break it. I think we all remember that one episode from Game of Thrones, like the last season. It was a bit dark, right? So here's a couple of examples. Yep. So like I intentionally broke that lighting scene on the side, just to make the point. So first of all, yeah, lighting artist usually has to work with the art director and the concept art team. I think that's a different slide. So let's start with art direction. So basically, you have to establish the mood and the vibes of the whole game. So that might, I don't know if you've seen Sifu, but it has like different biomes, and like I think it was like 6 levels, but every one of them was super unique and it's like own art set basically. So we had like the squads, that was like overgrown foliage, abandoned buildings, but also like, yeah, very much an urban environment. We had like the nighttime club, which was like more purplish, and yeah, some dramatic lighting. We had the sanctuary, which was like very serene and very like peaceful. And yeah. Most lighting artists usually have to work with the environment art team. For example, I'm the only lighting artist on our current project, and it's a team of like 10 environment artists. So most of the time you're gonna have to deal with, like, work with those kind of people and those specialties. It's very important to like make sure that the environments are like lit properly and you collaborate with that team, because most of the game that you're gonna see is gonna be environments, like 95%, and then you have the characters. So you're also gonna have to work with character artists, but yeah, on a like much smaller scale. And also cinematics, right, should be here doing that talk about, yeah. Sometimes, depending on the project, for example, if you played any game of from Supermassive, they have like shot cinematics, so you have to do shot lighting. Alan Wake is another example. And yeah, like a bunch of games do cinematics nowadays, and most of them are doing Hollywood quality cinematics, so it's fun stuff. And yeah, you have to make your lighting work in a real-time environment and make it efficient. You can do whatever you want on a like portfolio piece. It doesn't have to run at 60 frames per second, but most of the times you have to make specific effects, or like that could be like work with VFX. For example, I want to make a skybox, or I want to make some clouds. You don't necessarily have to work like to them yourself. You might get some help from tech art, or you might get some help for VFX if it's like a lighting related effect that the game requires. And of course, yeah, you don't have to kill the performance. Oh. I don't think I need to go too much detail on that. Like, this could be like a 2-hour workshop. So yeah, what does a lighting artist do on a day-to-day basis? So the most typical thing you're gonna be doing is just lighting levels, placing point lights here and there. Hopefully not too many of them. Hopefully you don't cast the shadows with them. But yeah, the directional lights, skylights and whatnot. I'm gonna get back to that later. You're gonna be doing look development, especially during the pre-production part of the game. So you're gonna be working with concept art. You're gonna be working with the art director to establish, yeah, the look of the game, as we said. For example, yeah, this is like a piece I worked with, yeah, my friend Pat and Grigoris. He did the concept art. He did the modeling and texturing and retopo and UVs and everything else. I just lit everything. You're gonna be doing post-processing, so that involves things like, I think I have another example, yeah. So like, that's for example, the scene that the environment artist might give you, and your job is to basically make it look hopefully a bit prettier. Let me go back and forth. Yeah. Is it prettier? I don't know, you tell me. So yeah, this includes things like vignettes, adding like grain, film grain, chromatic aberration, make things look more realistic, of course. Color grading as well, that's the next point. Bloom, motion blur, depth of field with the camera work. Yeah, and color grading, which means, that's another 2-hour workshop. So basically, you start off with like a kind of boring image. You might have seen, for example, those very fancy travel reels on Instagram from Madeira specifically. They just make everything look amazing and like contrasty and very colorful. So basically, we do the same in games. Oh yeah, and also rendering. As I said before, yeah, we need to make sure that everything runs and you don't kill the performance of the game, and you don't have tech artists chasing you for enabling global illumination on mobile devices. And yeah, that's a very small note on the movie render queue. That's like an Unreal specific thing, but if you're working with cinematics and you want to render some stuff, yeah, ideally you need to learn that tool. It will allow you to basically production quality, like Hollywood quality level renders within like Unreal. So, oh no, I didn't time the animation right. We need an animator here. So, what does a lighting artist need in terms of like artistic knowledge, and then we'll go to the technical piece. So first of all, we got value and contrast. Basically, value means where do you want the viewer to focus their eyes on. So that comes back into like traditional drawing even. So like those two things haven't really changed. You need to know basically how to, not color grade, but have balanced levels in your photos. Usually you don't even need colors, we're gonna get to that, but for example, you need to make sure your histogram is balanced and nothing is overexposed or underexposed, and that's the same thing with photography. Contrast has many forms. It could be like color contrast, it could be shape contrast, it could be value contrast. So yeah, that's another very important tool, tool set that you need to master. And of course, color, you need to know some color theory. It would be, I mean, you don't need to know anything, but it's always very beneficial to know some color theory, know your complementary colors, know what each color, for example, what emotions each color gives off. For example, it could be like some very dark, cold, rainy weather. So ideally, you can't have that being red or some super happy orange color, right? And yeah, you also would be very good to know photography. You don't really need to be like a street photographer or professional photographer, portrait photographer. Just learn your aperture, learn your f-stops, learn your like ISO settings, and play around with it. You can even do it with your phone if your phone has like a manual mode. And yeah, on the technical knowledge side of things, it's a lot of stuff. Yeah, so I'll be a bit specific now because most of the artists in here are probably using an Unreal. That's the industry standard, and yeah, this has the most artist-friendly workflows and tools. So yeah, a couple of things you should know: light sources. Learn about what light sources you can use. You could use direction lights, skylights. You could use point lights, spotlights, rectangular lights. All of those tools. Cameras, again, this is basically the equivalent of using a physical camera, so you're going to have to learn what focal length means, what aperture means. It's basically the same thing. So if you know how actual photography works, you're going to feel right at home. The cinematic tools, that's like a shot from sequencer, basically like a Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, but yeah, within Unreal. I mean, I should have started with basic game engine understanding, so you should know some Unreal. Some basic shaders / material work, so you can create the master materials that you need, some effects or whatnot. What else you got? Ooh, PBR. Oh no. Basically, PBR means that all of your materials are physically accurate. So you need to know a couple of things about how light your base color texture should be, how dark it should not be. Same with roughness, metallic surfaces. So basically how materials behave in the real world. There's a lot of tutorials on YouTube on that, so I won't make a 2-hour video of that. Yeah, some volumetrics. With that, you can fake God rays, you can fake mostly God rays, to be honest, but you can make it very foggy or misty, depending on the mood that you want to get. And post-process volumes, which is yeah, all the extra camera effects that you apply later on in the pipeline. So how do you get started? I promise I'm almost done. You watch YouTube tutorials. William Foster is like great resource, and I have more resources at the end of the presentation, so it shouldn't be that hard. You do lighting studies. Initially, I started off doing, like, as a 3D artist, I was aimlessly doing 3D modeling, then I switched into like doing dioramas, and then I did more environments when I was doing environment art. In the end, yeah, the thing that got me the job was mainly some like 4 or 5 lighting studies that I did. You usually need to get some references. This could be real world photos. This could also be like reference from another game, and you try to recreate that. So yeah, could go on forever, but yeah, you usually have to do some lighting studies, so the employer that you can actually recreate the same mood that you want from your reference. Yeah, these are some of them. Oh yes, and I should say that yeah, lighting art is kind of niche right now, and we kind of need more lighting artists. So if what I'm saying seems interesting, hit me up. Let's chat. And yeah, it's a nice time to be a lighting artist, to be honest. We got Lumen, we got all, like UE5, all these new technologies. Like you don't really actually need like top of the line PC or anything. You can actually create things without knowing light maps or like all those technical things, at least to get you started. And yeah, I think yes. Before we go to the examples, though, as I said, for example, you can get your inspiration from real-life reference. You can, that's a nice, beautiful sunset photo. You could get like some directional light reference on the right, so like some harsh lighting, some noon lighting. Some interiors, for example, you could try recreating that. You can use megascans to get your models, so you don't really need to model anymore, thankfully. And yeah, some very quick examples of how I would go approaching one scene. So this is one of the scenes I did for an art session challenge, starting off with the emissives. They don't really contribute anything to the overall lighting of the scene, but if this was in UE5, for example, this would have also contributed some indirect lighting. You get your directional light, you get your skylight to fill in those dark spots, because yeah, like this one doesn't have any bounce lighting to fill in the unshadowed areas, the shadowed areas actually. You add some volumetrics. This is where volumetric fog comes in place, comes in hand, and you enhance it with some like hand-placed cloud and fog cards. You add some local lights. This is where you add the point lights or like spotlights to just paint the lighting of your scene. I think Bob Ross said that. And yeah, some extra light objects placement just to fill in the scene. And yeah, get another example, like that's a simpler setup. But we got the key light, that's the main light, and usually it's the strongest one. We got the fill light just to, again, I think I have more fill lights, yes. That was a very dark scene. Yeah, just to fill in the shadowed areas, give it some more visual information. Ideally, you don't want anything to be pitch black, because then the viewer cannot see what you want to present. Some rim lighting, that's mostly for props and characters. And you do it usually to separate the character and the prop from the background. And you can really see that, but I added some volumetrics just to give some extra depth to the scene. And yeah, as I said, everything's fun and games when you're making your portfolio. You don't really have to do anything crazy in terms of optimization or like sacrifice on visual quality. You can just crank lumen to the max settings, and yeah, your scene could run on at 5 FPS, but you can still render it out. But yeah, one thing to note in professional environments, you need to be ready to adapt. So like your game might need to be a cross-platform game, so you could be might be asked to support mobile devices, support the suites, or anything like that. So we might have to do with backlighting. For example, F1 we had, can I say? I don't know. Never mind. But yeah, as I said here, you have to support multiple platforms, and that's usually a tricky thing. Some resources here. Some of them are like in article form, like the first one from Chris. Some YouTube channels which have some great playlists on like how to get started and how you get around thinking on lighting your scene. Stodeck is a nice one because it gives you, it's a paid resource as far as if I recall correctly, but it gives you basically reference from movies, so you can go to any frame of any popular movie at least, and yeah, just have it as a one-to-one reference. And yeah, have also a small announcement. I'll be launching, a lighting-focused portfolio reviews channel, so you don't even have to scan that. So like, feel free to message me on LinkedIn or ArtStation, and we can have a chat. It's gonna be a weekly thing, I think, hopefully. So depending on how many people sign up. Oh yeah, sure. Oh no, that's too much. And yeah, that was the end of the talk. Let me know if you have any questions. I don't know how much time we got. Yeah, it was.
And yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you want to put your hand up. I'm going to dive and not get feedback. So yeah, has anyone got any questions for Angelo on lighting art? I can't answer questions about lighting art. Yeah, sorry. Anyone at all? One over here?
I don't know if it's relevant or if you can answer here, but if you had lots of lighting to do in a game, how would you go about doing that without breaking performance? If lots of...
Usually you start like with the direction light. So like one of the resources will tell you that you start like on a step-by-step approach. Get your main light, which is usually a directional light if it's an exterior. If it's an interior, you kind of go with the studio lighting setup. So like you could have the key light, you could have your fill light, and then you just go in from there. It really depends on the platform, to be honest. Like if you are doing mobile, for example, and you can really have lumen, and that's the end of it. So you just bake your lights, and that saves up so many resources. So yeah, it really depends on the situation. We can chat about that later.
Hello? Okay.
Testing. Yeah, so I wanted to ask, to what extent do you consider, so let's say you're like adding lighting to a scene, and maybe you're like, oh, I'm gonna add a point light here, directional light there. To what extent do you consider where the light is coming from? Because maybe you'll add a light, it'll make it look good, but there's no light bulb or no window there. So to what extent do you consider the implications of where the light is coming from? Or does it not matter if it looks good and it looks authentic?
I'm gonna say the same thing again. It really depends on the game, but ideally you want to match your lighting with the direction of the sun. Like if, for example, the art director told you it needs to be a sunset scenario, your direction light is gonna be very low, your shadows are gonna be very long, and things like that. If the environment artist have already placed some lights, so like let's say some light bulbs, or like you know you have a window on one side of the room. Ideally, you want to like rotate your directional light in a certain way to make things as interesting as you can. Basically, see how the shadows react. If you have an armchair, for example, right next to the window, you can use that, get some interesting shapes. But again, yeah, it really depends. Ideally, you start from the beginning, like you always have that in mind. So yeah.
Have you ever asked the environment artists, like, oh, can we add a light here?
Oh yeah. It's usually a back and forth process with the environment team, and that was why I mentioned the environment artist first, because as a lighting artist, you usually are gonna be with the environment artists in like the stand-up meetings, like the general groups. Of course, it's gonna depend on the company and the project, but these are the scenarios that you're gonna have to deal with at most of the time.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you. Near the end of the presentation, you've given this step-by-step showcase of this alien environment with the bluegrass, I think. You put adding in the actual like in-level lights, like the little light posts at the end. I was just curious because I'm a person who doesn't know anything, obviously, and I was curious, like, but logically you put them at the start because I thought like they would be kind of dominating the scene instead of like the fake lights that just exist. Is this like the usual spot for these kind of lights in terms of the pipeline, or does it strongly depend on the project?
No, not really. It might have been. I think I just forgot about them up until the very end, so. It was a challenge, so it was time limited. So I just wanted to fill in the scene with some extra visual information, and I think that's why I came up with the idea of creating them. It was the first like environment that I did without a concept art. So yeah, I just went on with it and see how it was.
So normally in the pipeline it's like earlier on or the start, but you can also add like stand-in lights if you feel it's necessary or needed for art style.
Yeah, if you feel like it, but it really depends on like if the art director has already signed off the environment and like the placement of the lights, you might be limited to that. Like that was just by myself, so I didn't have any limitations on what I could place or where, so yeah.
Thank you.
Hey there, so just out of curiosity, do you have a limit on how many, say, revisions you can have to do the lighting art? So how many times you can go back and forth between the teams before the deadline?
Not really, but I mean, I'm not a freelancer, so I'm not working on a sort, like lighting on a sort basis, so
purely
it's, up to the
director
timelines of the project, so yeah. Sometimes it could be like 5 revisions, sometimes it would be good from the first time, so you never really know.
Is there like a limit on how many people there are in the team for lighting artists, or is it just the one artist that does it?
No, you can just, depends on the project.
Fair enough. No, thanks for that.
Hello, thank you for your talk. When it comes to video games, some video games use light to guide the player to a level. Would that be your job as a lighting artist or the level designers?
Usually it's a collaboration between the two, but for example, I worked on American Arcadia a couple of years back, and basically showcasing the player where the golden path is was one part of the responsibilities. Although, as I said before, it was work alongside with the level designers, so they designed the path, and then we had the communication, like catch-ups, and they told us, this is where which the specific parts of the image and the composition that we want to focus on. So this is where we paid most of the attention and placed specific lights in those areas.
Thank you.
Hello? Oh, any other questions?
We got one more.
Thanks. Do you do much texture manipulation when you do lighting? So do you color grade textures in the scene to achieve looks that you're after, or do you leave that alone?
On personal stuff, I might go in and like tweak Megascan assets, like their textures. It's very easy to do that within Unreal, so you don't even have to go into Photoshop or do any crazy stuff. I usually give to myself some master material, like adjustments, so like I can increase the base color brightness, or I can change the saturation of it. But usually you wanna stay away from adjusting textures, because yeah, these are textures that have been authored from usually the environment art team or the character art team, and they have followed the PBR guidelines, hopefully, so you don't really want to mess around with their work.
Yeah. Thank you. I do have one more question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So with baked lighting, if you're lighting a scene early on where there could be lots of layout changes, obviously it could be quite frustrating to rebake lighting all the time for, you know, if environment artists are working on the team. So do you like leave baked lighting to the end, or do people just deal with like weird shadows and things like that?
I mean, you just cry every day, so it's fine. Usually it's an iterative process, and with bigger projects, you usually get the resources to like do light maps very quickly. So the team might have like a build engine, like a bead machine on the side, so it could pump out like on a daily some new light maps. Usually this is how it's handled, like the environment art team does some light map work, so like they prepare the UVs, I prepare the lights, and yeah, you just have to iterate on that. Ideally, your lighting work should start a bit after the environment art has done like one or two passes. So you kind of know the placement of the models are going to be kind of final. Not too many things are going to shift around. So yeah,
Great.
Usually, yeah, it's just after the environment art team has finished the work, and you just pray that they don't change everything overnight.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Cool.
Thank you.
Can we give Angelo another massive round of applause, please? Thank you, Angelo. So we're going to have a very brief intermission, so if you need to use the facilities or go and grab a drink, just have a chat amongst yourself for 5-10 minutes, and then we'll come back up and we'll have a listen to David's talk. Thanks. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Sorry to interrupt once again. So we will be starting in about 30 seconds. I think there's a couple more people downstairs, but we'll get started with David. So David Pumpa from Playground Games, talking about cinematics animation. Looking forward to it. If we can give a big welcoming round of applause to David, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. So I know there's kind of a variety of people with varying levels of experience, varying disciplines. So I was trying to think of what would be a good conversation for cinematics. And I decided to settle on cinematic design, which applies to literally everyone here. Why do we decide to use a cinematic? Why do we decide to place it there? Why do we decide to go in and out of it in the way we do? So real quick, a little bit about myself. My name is David Pumpa. I am a cinematic animator. I've been in the industry for about 13 years, worked on about at least 11 cinematic AAA titles, and I am currently now the lead cinematic animator at Playground Games. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about cinematics tonight, and cinematics can be a very broad topic. It can cover a whole bunch of different things. So when I say cinematics, what do I mean? Well, my favorite definition of cinematics is any animation content within a game that you only see once. And cinematics is an interesting topic because it really kind of fights the idea of a video game in general. A cinematic is a movie. A cinematic is a thing that takes control away from the player, so we commonly ask ourselves, why do we have these? What is the point? Isn't it just a big boondoggle? Because cinematics are big, they are expensive. They take away control from the player, so why? Well, in a story-driven game, we use cinematics for 4 key reasons. The first one being that we like to create emotionally heavy content. Another is to manage the pacing of a game. Third is to deliver essential information to the player. And 4 is to do things that we can't normally do in gameplay. So let's dive into this a little bit here. The first one, creating emotionally heavy content. Whenever you're making a story-driven game, you want to focus on the characters. The characters are the ones who create the story. And if you want to become invested in a character, you need to understand what they're feeling in the moment. How do they progress? How do they react to different situations? And unfortunately, when we're in gameplay, we're stuck in pretty much one camera angle, which is either first-person perspective or far away. And even worse, we're not looking at the player's face at all. So we're constantly looking at a character like this. Can anyone tell that I'm pissed off right now? No? Yeah, me neither. So cinematics is a great way for us to dive into what the character is experiencing at any given moment. We get to take the camera, we get to put it right in their face. Understand their exact reaction. And maybe the emotion of the scene is not on the character themselves, but somewhere else. Maybe it's on the environment. Maybe it's on the stillness of the forest, a lonely teacup, a knife in a body. Next, cinematics manages tension within a game. Now, humans are very interesting creatures. We have this survival rate where we have to rely on the rise and fall of tension, rise and fall. And if we're experiencing tension for too long, we become stressed out, we become agitated, and if left alone for too long, we become mentally ill. The reverse is true as well. If we're too bored, we go crazy, go overstimulated, start talking to ourselves. So if you have a good game and a good design, a lot of times this rise and fall of tension gets managed through the design loop. So you oscillate between these moments of combat and inventory management, of gathering resources and building up your base, or exploration and party management, that kind of a thing. But cinematics helps you manage this well. Cinematics allows you to remove control away from the player and allows you to create a natural release of tension in a way that's not too ham-fisted. So, delivering essential information. Another great thing about cinematics is because we have control of the camera, because we took away the control from the player, we have 100% of the player's attention. So we get to tell them exactly what they need to know. If we're doing our job right, we're combining this with the other 2 elements as well. So if it's emotionally rich content, if it's engaging content, then the player wants to hear that information as well. So not only is the content helpful, not only are we providing information that way, but because we have control of the camera, We can also direct the player the area we want them to go next. So a cinematic can end, the camera can turn, we can look, boom, that's where you're supposed to go, that tunnel right there. And then finally, we can do things in cinematics that we can't normally do in gameplay. Whenever you're designing a game, we typically have some very set action verbs. You can walk, you can run, you can jump, you can attack, you can harvest, you can pet the dog, and it's all essential to gameplay. And while that may seem limiting, cinematics gives us the opportunity to break those limitations and do things to help us out. Like for instance, what if you want to transition from one area to another? And you want to make sure that the player can't walk backwards. Well, let's say that your player can't swim. A cinematic can put you in a situation where the player has to swim or has to struggle with swimming and then put you in a different area, and can they go backwards? No, it's not a verb. You can't swim. That's insane. When I was working on this game, the Order 1886, repel was not one of our verbs. But it created a very unique situation. We got to create a set piece that was engaging and fun to the player because we got to rappel down a zeppelin and have fun. This is another thing that cinematics can do. Because we can do things that aren't normally available in gameplay, you can create these little pockets of unique content that is engaging to the player and also breaks up the monotony of the game itself. However, regardless of our intention, regardless of what the point of the cinematic is, it does not matter if the player decides to skip it. So this is what my presentation is about, is how do you maximize the content of your cinematics? How do you make the player not want to skip your cinematic? So we do this by maximizing the content. And the first way we do this is through previs. Now, previs is something we all go through. It's the rapid iteration, the fail fast, fail early mentality of trying to do as many different ideas at once to see what yields the best content. Previs is extremely useful because it allows you to find the core of your cinematic content and find ways to keep it tight and exaggerate it so it can reach its full potential. At Playground, we spend 5 weeks per cutscene on previs. The first step is we go through a live rehearsal where we take the script, we hand it to the actors, we rent out a nice little space, bring our own cameras, and we like to play pretend. And we'll go through a scene dozens of times until everyone has found the root of the scene. The actors have found the characters, they found the emotions, they know exactly how to express it. And once we've done that, we go to the table read. It's where the entire cinematics team gets together, sits around a table, as said, and we read the script out loud and we watch all the rehearsals. And this is the point where we get to find out the limitations of the scene. We could say, hey, you know, I see what you're going for, but it's kind of limiting if we do this, or it doesn't really make sense, and the story doesn't make sense here. And then we think, technically, how is this going to be possible? Well, if we do this, it's going to distract from this, or break this, or we just physically can't do this. Afterwards, the scene gets assigned to one of our cinematic artists, and they come up with a written treatment. And a written treatment is a 1 to 2 page document that covers every aspect of the cinematic. It gives you a summary, character motivation, the blocking of the scene, the asset list, the lighting, the color palette, even references that we're trying to pull from as well. Once that gets approved, then we go to our step previs, which is the video that I just showed you here. A step previs is the first time we see it all come together. It's represented in 3D, and we get a great sense of the timing, the pacing, and the content, the choreography that we want to see ourselves. Here we get to find out what really doesn't work. And if it doesn't quite have that emotional beat, doesn't have that content that really captivates the player, that's when we take it back and we try it again. Once that's done, we put it in game for the first time. And this is a really fun step because not only are we looking at the cinematic, we're looking at the quest as a whole. We can find out whether or not the cinematic is actually working within the context of our game. How many cinematics do we have within this one section? Do we have 2 back-to-back? Does it match the tone of what we're trying to convey in the quest itself? And if it doesn't, we need to go back again. And then finally, if there's still unanswered questions, we go into moving previs, which is where we, the cinematic artists and animators, put on the mocap suit ourselves and we act it out. This is great because it really gives you a real tight sense of timing and allows you to find any kind of, or clear up any kind of confusion you may have left. Another strategy is to not use just one vision. A lot of people like to think they're the director. They want to be the director. They think they have the vision, the one vision to make everything right. However, whenever you have one vision, you are sticking with one person's perspective, one person's idea, one person's set of experiences. And that is a very limiting. Just because you have a vision does not necessarily mean it's the right vision. So it's extremely important to call in other perspectives, to flesh it out a bit. So at Playground, we like to use multiple perspectives, starting with the scriptwriter. The scriptwriter is going to find your need. They're going to look at the story as a whole, they're going to look at the quest, and they're going to say, hey, what information do we need to convey here? What story beats do we need to move forward with? How do we get it out there? Once that's established, we hand it over to the actor who's going to discover your personality. They're going to discover, okay, I understand this character, I own this character, how are they going to react in this situation? And the important thing here is to let the actor discover that themselves. Just because you have a vision doesn't mean it's the actor's vision. An actor may have a totally different interpretation of what the scene might be. And you don't want to squash this. If you try to impose your will, your vision onto the actor, what you're going to get is a stunted or stiff or action. So let the actor bring their interpretation to the scene. Next, we have a cinematographer who's going to find the emotion of your scene. And the emotion, a lot of times, is not on the speaker, or sometimes it's not even on the actor themselves. It's like I said before, sometimes it may be in a wide shot, on a still object, or just rain on a windowsill. Once that's figured out, we give it to the animator, and the animator is going to find your rhythm. They see what you have, they see what you want to focus on, and they decide what should be pulled back and what should be exaggerated. So that when you have your beats, they're hit as hard as possible. So by the end of all this, you should have extremely engaging, silky rich content that your players absolutely want to experience. Another way to maximize your content is to keep it short. The worst thing you can do for a player is let them get comfortable with the idea of putting the controller down. When they put the controller down, that means they have broken their sense of immersion. That means they feel comfortable getting up, going to get a beverage, maybe a snack. Maybe they're going to go rock a piss. But good cinematic artists don't do that. Good cinematic artists create meaningful content. Good cinematic artists don't let the player pee. So our policy at Playground Games is to keep it to about 45 seconds long. And the way you do this, well, first of all, you identify your number, but it's important to establish this number early on. You want the player to expect things. When you release a game, have the player understand that in their day one content that a cinematic is going to be approximately this length. Because when they expect this, they know for certain that every time they go into a cinematic, they say, okay, it's only going to be this long. It's not that long. I'm going to sit through, I'm going to see what they have to offer. Another way to do this is with previs. With previs, you can identify all the areas that are not necessary to conveying the point you need to do, or that you need to convey. What information is actually critical, what emotions actually need to be there. Previs helps. What also helps is having an editor. Now, this is traditionally a film role, but an editor is extremely important because they're going to cut out all the fluff, all the fat that's left on your cinematic, and it's going to leave you with nothing but nice, lean content. Now, a good thing to remember is an editor is none of these people here, because an editor is going to do the thing that these people will not. An editor is going to kill their babies. An editor is going to trim it down, reduce it to nothing to the point where you're going to hate it. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had some content stripped down by an editor, and I think, oh, God, that's it. They've ruined it. It's done. And then a month later, look back on it and be like, oh, no, that's right. Yeah, they were right. So, the other thing to remember is in cinematics, we're not just limited to creating cutscenes. Cutscenes are the actual movies you put into games, but cinematics is so much more. Cinematics is any kind of bespoke content you want to put out in the world. So a big part of our job is world building. We create these things called vignettes. Naughty Dog calls them IGCs or in-game cinematics, but it's any of these little set pieces that are out there to help enhance the world and do some world building. So we create these unique animations to add a sense of or add to the emotion. So to give you an example, all gameplay animators may come up with environmental animations or area animations or action spots and that kind of a thing, but they're trying to create animations that work for everything. They want to use those animations as much as possible, which is fine. Like for instance, if you're walking into a town and the mayor is like, hey, welcome to my town. If you notice, there's a person weaving over here. Here we have a person cleaning up their clothes in the river. And over here we have Cletus shucking corn for the harvest festival. You didn't bring your butter, did you? And that's fine, it works great. Until the zombies attack. And then suddenly the mood changes. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, board up the windows real quick, distribute the animation. Oh my God, kill that guard, he just got bitten, and Cletus shuck that corn! It doesn't work. So vignettes are a way to take that content, take the context of the scene, and then twist it to help. So for instance, like the shucking corn animation may not work, but if you create a vignette where Cletus is on the ground crying, hurling ears of corn at the window because he's trying to keep the zombies from eating him, that enhances the emotion. That enhances the situation you're dealing with. Another thing you can do is to sprinkle cinematic elements in other aspects of gameplay. Now, we have our own cinematic language when we do cutscenes. We have our own cinematic language and the way we do pacing. We have our movies. But can anyone here name an example of where else cinematography might be used? Yes? Trailers, okay. Now let's think about in-game. Here's an example right here. QuickTime event, there it is. So QuickTime events aren't a very popular thing, but it is an example of where we use cinematography and some limited gameplay to kind of blend between these two things. Another example is takedowns. Cinematic takedowns, opportune attacks where you finish a character, you use bespoke cameras for that. And we use the same cinematic language there as we do in our cutscenes. Another example is conversation systems. Conversations are all procedurally generated, there's a ton of content, but you better believe there are cinematic artists and animators guiding how those cameras look, what shots are allowed, what shots are not, what's the timing, how close do we get. And we do all this because we're trying to maintain a seamless, interactive experience. We don't want to create these cordoned off areas of cutscene gameplay. Did you feel that? Right there, right there. Bet you felt it deep. Something was wrong. I paused for too long. And every single one of you thought, did he forget something? Did it not quite work? And it's because as a public speaker, there's an expected rhythm to how I do things. You know that I should have a certain cadence of words, I should have a certain pace, and when I pause for too long, it breaks it all apart, and that's exactly what we're doing here. If you have these stunted moments or these broken moments of just cinematic content and gameplay, you no longer have that seamless interaction. So, the way we deal with this is through the use of transitions. And this isn't surprising, we use transition cinematics all the time, but you can't just throw any transition around willy-nilly. So here we have 4 examples of 4 cutscenes from various Naughty Dog games, and we're going to go through each one. So we use 3 major transitions when we do cinematics. The first one is the classic blend. Everyone should know this one. This is where we go from a gameplay animation into a cinematic animation using a smooth interpolation, either linear or spline. This is very useful because it can be used in a wide variety of situations, but it relies on you knowing exactly where the player is going to be and which direction they're going to be facing. The next one is the snap. The snap is just an immediate cut to the first shot of the cinematic. It is abrupt, it is startling, but it can be used in a wide variety of situations where you know you have control. And then finally, we have the soft trigger. This is a lesser used transition where the player can come from anywhere. It's used in broad areas where we don't know where the player is going to be standing and we don't know which direction they're going to be facing. And a soft trigger is where we play the first shot of the cinematic wherever the player is standing. And then when we cut to the second shot, we teleport the player to a new position using the magic of cinematography. But we can't use any transition We need to focus on what's going to feel right. And one of the ways we do that is we focus on the momentum of the scene. We want to maintain our momentum. So one of the previous examples here, if you remember this cutscene, there was a point where the character was like running and sprinting, and they're being grabbed at by freakers, and they're crawling, and they're sprinting, and oh my god, the door's at the very end of the hallway, and I'm going to get right there. And then bam, we cut to this. Now imagine this exact same scenario, but imagine getting all the way to the end of that hallway, running and sprinting, and then you stop, turn the handle, open the door, and walk in. Cutscene. All that tension, all that effort you took to bring that up and just manage this, suddenly gone because you used the wrong type of transition. It's the same thing and just the opposite. What if you were in a completely relaxed state? You're in an open field, open world, and you're walking around, a cutscene. You've completely destroyed your sense of calm. So the other thing we work on is player agency. Whenever we want to go into a cutscene, we need to make sure that the player feels like they were the one who chose to go into the cutscene. And we do this through a bunch of different ways. The first one is using portals. And by portals, I mean any kind of thresholds. We use doorways, bridges, rivers, any kind of physical barrier that makes the player say, hey, that area is different than this area. When I cross into it, I should expect something different. Another way is through funneling. This is through unnatural means. Like if we want to have a crowd of people, and we walk into the crowd, and then suddenly it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And before you know it, the player's in a funneled space, and then we trigger the cinematic. Next is to use established verbs. So we already have a bunch of verbs in our game. If we use that same kind of language, we can establish that something's going to happen when they interact with that. So things like vaults, climbs, jumping over ledges, down cliffs. All of those are established verbs where we can transition into a cinematic. They know as soon as you jump into that, something is going to happen. Something neat's going to happen. And then finally, we have interaction points. If you can get to a point and a button prompt comes up, the player sees it and says to themselves, okay, I'm going to touch this and something's going to happen. Now, all these transitions are extremely important for maintaining the flow. But what we don't want to see is a loading screen. Because a loading screen will kill all of that momentum. So imagine if as you're making your quest, you're making your game, that you're making a pie. So you have your quest, you set your crust as your pie, and quest there. You add a bunch of combat to it, maybe season it with some combat, and then you take the whole thing and you put it in the oven, let the rising tension kind of heat it up, and then, oh, it's nice and ready and everything, and you're going to reach your climax, and then bam, loading screen. You just dropped your pie. So it's important to consider all this when making your cutscenes. So to summarize, maximize your content. Make sure that whatever you're showing is, one, a justified cinematic. You have a reason to create that cinematic. And that, two, every frame of that cinematic is saturated with content. Content that the player wants to see. Two, don't let your player pee. Keep your cinematic short. Three, shuck that corn. Don't rely on videos. Cinematic content goes way beyond and can be put in anything. And finally, don't drop the pie. Use transitions and use the right one for the job. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much. That was a very brilliant talk. I wanted to ask you, some video games are very notorious for this, where they use a lot of cutscenes. One example I want to use is Metal Gear Solid 4. It's a game that's 25 hours long, but 13 of those hours are cutscenes. When do you use a cutscene, and when do you keep it to gameplay to tell a story?
If you noticed, one of the 4 things I didn't talk about up here is I said emotional content, can't do things that games can't do. Oh, it's my phone, excuse me. Talk about immersion breaking. So anyways, emotional content, doing things that games can't do. But one of the things I did not mention was telling a story. A cinematic should not be used to tell a story, but if it does, it needs to be emotionally rich. There are so many ways to tell a story. And since we're making a video game, not a movie, you should try to tell that story on the sticks as much as possible. They should experience the story rather than witness it. We are an interactive medium. We should be interacting with everything. So when you say you have to sit through 15 minutes of a cinematic, is that fun for you? No, absolutely not. You want to play the game. Let the player play the game. Next question.
Oh, could I do a second
Absolutely.
faster one? When it comes to a story of a game, should the story be completely comprehensible just through gameplay, or should cinematics take on a little bit of that sort of work?
It can. Remember, one of the things I talked about is cinematics is conveying information that's essential to the player. A lot of times, information can be obfuscated just because of the sheer amount of content around you or the sheer amount of stimulus. A cinematic is a great way to point exactly at what you want the player to know. You don't want to confuse the player at any point unless that is part of the intention of your game, like Stanley Parable or something like that. But ideally, because it's for the mass public, for mass consumption, you want to make sure that the player is not confused, because if they get confused, they get frustrated, and they're not going to play the game anymore. And that's going to be a big waste.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. It was a really good talk. So you know when you get like big name actors or something, you went through the people where you did like previs and all of that stuff, but I guess you only have like the big name actor for a day or something you must do, or like a short amount of time. So do they get to bring much to your cinematic, or are you kind of like, you do the thing, you know, we've gone through all this previs work, we know what this scene is exactly going to do. Do they just kind of show up and do a bit of mocap and voice acting, or?
So the actor is not engaged for just a day. Whenever we choose an actor for a project, we have to pay an upfront kind of engagement fee, but afterwards they're on the project for the entire time. So our very first step of previs is actually the rehearsal, where we bring the actors in and we have them discover who the character is. That's super important. They're the ones who are leading the charge about who, like what the story is, who the character is, and that kind of a thing. And we make adjustments based on what they bring to the table. So yes, they bring a ton to what the cinematic is actually going to be.
Cool. No, it's really interesting. Thank you.
Just a second.
Oh my goodness. You maybe want to just like write it on a message and toss it down to me?
Hey, David. Can you give me a good example of cinematography in games that you think is good? The best cinematography in game.
I mean, I'm gonna be
Not to be
super.
biased.
I'm gonna be super biased here.
You can't be biased.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. Anything Naughty Dog, they do, not specifically their cinematography, but because of what they do before and after their cinematics. They do such an amazing job at making everything feel so seamless, and they do it in a way where you feel like you forget you're in a cinematic in the first place. And when you leave the cinematic, you forget that you're in gameplay. Everything is a surprise, but everything flows so beautifully, and that's something I truly appreciate. Because this is such a unique medium, because it's mixing the interactivity and the visual, the thing I truly appreciate is when you can merge those two things together effortlessly. That's amazing. So regardless of what happens in a cutscene, like the cinematography can be great. If they can't transition into the next thing, then you've only dealt with 10% of your experience. You've left everything else and kind of cut it all up kind of piecemeal, and that's gross.
We've got another one up here.
When you recruit actors to play an act for your cutscenes, what sort of experience do you expect from them? So is it someone who has like a not maybe the correct word, but generic acting experience for theater, for example, or do you expect to have specific experience in acting for games?
So when we do acting, we break it up into two parts. One is the stunt actors and one is the actual performance actors. Stunt actors, we want them to have games experience. We want them to know exactly what we need to get out of it. But performance actors are a lot more flexible. And casting is an extremely important aspect of this whole process. Because if you can't find an actor who fits the situation, your whole story is going to kind of fall flat. So we're looking for an actor who can specifically fill a role and can bring a personality to that role that really enhances the story. So we're not looking for generic actors. We're not looking ones who are competent in wearing a mocap suit. That can be teachable. That's easy. We're just trying to find a person who has the personality and the presence to maximize that role.
Any more questions?
Oh no.
Okay, I'm coming down.
You're making her walk downstairs. You don't know that. See, this is where we would cut. We would do a jump cut to the next time.
It's a good cardio.
Yeah. Thank you for the talk. So in the examples you have displayed today, some of them had top and bottom black borders. So what's your opinion on having those, and when should they be used in games?
It's definitely an artistic choice. Like the order insisted on doing like the anioscopic, like super wide frame, and honestly, it's really not necessary. If you feel like it enhances the artistic vision, fine. Like for instance, on Ghost of Tsushima, we also did the black bars, but it was only because we were trying to specifically mimic the Kurosawa films of like the old samurais and that kind of thing. I think if you need black bars to communicate you're in a cinematic, then you're doing it wrong. This should be a seamless interaction back and forth. If you need to break it up or you need to accentuate the fact that you're in this kind of a thing, it's not necessary. But again, it's artistic choice, so I can't say anything is wrong.
Thank you.
Cheers, David. Yeah, for the casting, when an actor is cast, are you part of that conversation, or is it just like a person that does the casting? Is that?
I mean, ideally, I want to be part of all the processes, but realistically, you have to know where you're needed. So Mark is our cinematic director. Mark is a person who knows casting extremely well. He has a background in film. He has a ton of experience working with actors. He's going to be able to identify things within an actor that I would never even guess at. So let the expert do his thing. I would much rather focus on the things that I'm an expert at, which is making this working game.
Cool. Cheers, David.
Anyone else? Oh, okay.
Hi, so I'm really interested to hear, like, if you're going through that entire process through previs and stuff, and you might need specific assets, so like, I don't know, something that the actor's going to hold, and then how that then relates to other teams that are going to get involved, and then that might get kicked back to you, and you might not get the asset, and I don't know, sort of like how basically you work with other teams, like lighting artists as well, to convey a specific mood within cinematic.
It can be a point of frustration for sure if the timing of the asset doesn't match the timing of the cinematic, but we are making tons and tons and tons of content. If it doesn't quite land when we need it to, it's fine. And plus we're going through a very prolonged previs process. I could hold a cube in my hand and say it's something else, and I'd be satisfied just knowing that that prop exists. Eventually we need the final assets, and yes, it helps to have it like right there and ready, but it's not always going to happen. Now, different games approach the environments and assets differently. Sometimes they're working in parallel, where you're developing the cinematic at the same time as you're developing the environment, but sometimes it's better to kind of do scouting locations. So this is a very common concept in film, where you go around, you try to find locations for you to actually set up the scene in film and that kind of thing. You can do the same exact thing in video games. For instance, if you're in an open world, you can definitely find spots in that open world where you're like, oh my God, it would be amazing if we could put a cinematic here, because then we could do this and this and this. So if you can take advantage of what's already there, it's super helpful. But not everyone has that luxury. So I could go either way.
Cool, thank you.
Just bouncing off of that, so basically, does it ever happen that there's like when obviously like the space is being designed, is it sometimes designed with the idea, oh, there's going to be a very key moment happening in here, and then it gets bounced like back and forth between the cinematic artists and concept artists and 3D artists, like back and forth, back and forth?
Yes, but it largely is dependent on the use of that space. If you know you're using that space specifically for cinematics, then cinematics are going to be the people who make the call. If it's going to be a multi-purpose space, like for instance, if it's a common area, like it's like the town center or the place where player spawns all the time, that kind of a thing, then yeah, that's going to be the higher priority. So cinematics goes on the back burner. We don't want to interfere with anything that's happening there. But a lot of times it's a collaboration where, yes, we have this idea, we need the space, we don't know what's going to be in the space, but we're like, hey, is it possible? Could you put like a cart here, maybe like a chocolate fountain here, and that kind of a thing? Then they're very often willing to do that, so long as it doesn't interfere with anything else.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So the question is, the player has the freedom to interact with everything. What if they interact with something in a way that interferes with the intended flow of the cinematic? So this is something that happens all the time. Like for instance, like your character rides a motorcycle and you go into a cinematic on the motorcycle, but the cinematic doesn't have the motorcycle in it, how do you deal with that? Well, guess what? We test it. We plan around it. A lot of times it does happen, and we're like, oh shit, we didn't even think about that. So a lot of times when we don't know what the situation is going to be, we start the cinematic focused on something else. So instead of looking at the player the entire time, you're looking at something that's further downrange or another character or something in the environment. So that way when you cut back to the player, you can kind of infer that the player set themselves in a way that makes sense to the cinematic. So we let the ambiguity do the work for us.
So you talked about not wanting the player to go pee when they're doing a normal cinematic, but during like a sort of QTE, how do you sort of balance raising the tension without also giving the player massive amounts of rage or rage quitting the entire experience? Because I've certainly experienced some QTEs where I'm more outraged than actually experiencing any kind of tension in the scene.
You could look at this in one of two ways. One, you could say is that the intention was to be frustrating, that it should be a high difficulty thing because you're trying to reach that demographic who experiences frustration and finds it appealing. The other way is to say that it was poorly designed and say, hey, you know what, this is meant for a broader audience, it should be meant for a more casual player, we need to go back and revisit this and bring it down. Really depends on what you want to do with the situation.
Any more?
For me, it very much is in the almost exact same vein as what Scott just asked. But I was thinking, what is that decision process for QTEs? Because you know that, like you say, some people are going to be frustrated with it. You know that they're not very popular. So what would cause you to go down the route of putting one in?
This is where you go back to the design of the game itself. When you make the game, you understand what the fun is. If you went into the game with a certain idea in mind, and then you have a QTE and it doesn't align with what the fun of the game is, if it doesn't align with what the pillars of the game is, then it needs to be nixed. You need to go back and fix it because it doesn't fit anymore.
Any more?
A lot of good questions. I appreciate these.
Yeah, that was a great Q&A. Thank you very much. Thank you, David. So yeah, amazing talk from David there. Thank you again. I've got a couple of slides left, but they're literally just the QR codes which are dotted around the leaflets. So if any of you aren't in the meetup, if you're not in the Discord, then you can scan those codes and it'll take you to an invite and you can join up. That's where all of the events get announced. That's where we see most of the numbers and things. And the Discord is just a great place to kind of, if you're working on something, share it, just get a bit of a conversation going around feedback and things like that, or just advice and all sorts of things. So it's just a good space to be between events. The other thing as well is, I don't know what the time is, but we've probably got a little bit of time left on the bar downstairs. But then that will sort of close at about 9:30, 10. Then we're going to head down to the terrace bar and have a drink in there. So we've got some tables saved for that. So yeah, but otherwise, thank you very much to our speakers once again. If we can have another round of applause for both of them, please. Thank you all for coming, and I'll see you at the bar.